So welcome everyone. Today we're going to be covering the topic using Google Tools in your organization. This is a Switzer Foundation webinar. My name is Lauren Hertel. I'm the Communications Manager for the Switzer Foundation. You can contact me at lauren@switzernetwork.org. That's on the slide you're seeing right now. And anytime after the webinar if you have questions about materials that we cover today. So today we're going to be looking at a couple of areas of Google Tools. I'm going to go over what we use at Switzer and explain why we use the version of Google Tools that we use. There are actually different versions of the system of Google Apps, and we're going to talk about Google Apps and the version we use, some of the specific tools within those applications that we use heavily, and then I'll also tell you about a few of the things that we don't use as an organization but that I think are actually really useful. We have reasons that we don't use them, and I'll briefly go into that, why we don't use them. It does get at some of the limitations of Google. Believe it or not, there are limitations to Google and what its tool systems can do. After that, we'll talk about how to get buy-in. If you're looking to go to cloud computing with your organization, there's usually two camps of resistance. One camp is at the top of the food chain. Folks who are worried about security. The people who run your organization may be very worried about data security. They may be worried about the costs of data migration and training. So we'll talk about some of those concerns, and we'll also talk about the concerns that people who are going to have to use the system have. There's often resistance from the bottom of the organization, from the people who are going to have to switch from systems they already know and love, or maybe love and hate, or use and hate, but they still know those systems, and they're concerned about what it'll mean in terms of a learning curve to switch over to Google Apps. So we'll talk about that as well. I would like to go ahead and switch off of this right now. We're going to look at, I have a bunch of browser windows open here, and hopefully you all can see. I've just switched over to Delicious, which is a great spot for saving your bookmarks. If you cannot see the Delicious bookmark links, go ahead and use the raise hand button now. Otherwise, I'll assume everyone is looking at a page called Webinar, using Google Tools in your organization, with a bunch of different links on the page for Google Calendar, Google Groups, and some others. So I did want to just call this to your attention. I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, and you'll have the URL. I'll go ahead and share the URL for this website right now with you all in the chat window. And if you'd like to follow along on our web tour, you're more than welcome to do that. You can follow along. I'll be going pretty quickly through this, so you might just want to hold on to that link for later, so you can go back and look at some of the links I visited in the course of the web tour. So let's go ahead and launch right in. The pricing on Google, we'll talk about that first because it helps to understand why we chose the model that we chose. So there are three big buckets, I'll call them, three main buckets for Google Apps, and then all the tools that come with them. There's the Google Apps version that is available for individuals and small teams. As you can see from the pricing here, that's completely free to use. You can have up to 10 users on the account. You get an email inbox of 10 gigabytes, which is more than enough for most people for their purposes for an organization. And it gives you some nice things like custom email addresses and all of the basic apps that we'll be talking about in the course of today's webinar. So that's actually a great choice. There's nothing wrong in the world with, if you have a small organization, sticking with the free version of Google Apps. It covers most needs. We actually use Google Apps for Business, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. But if you look to the far right of the screen, you see there's also Google Apps for Business with Vault. And that involves a little bit more cost, but it's actually really useful if you're trying to replace an entire IT department. So if what you're looking to do is to have advanced security, like for law firms or investment banks, that kind of thing, they provide that. And then e-discovery is the ability to actually look through every user's account for keywords. So it's a really much more advanced control-based version of Google Apps. That's just overkill for us. For a small organization where everyone knows and trusts each other, Google Apps with Business for Vault is sort of overkill. So with Switzer, we actually use Google Apps for Business. You can see it's the center column right here. It's $5 per user per month or $50 per user per year, which is what we do. That's actually a very small amount to pay when you consider all of the features that it offers, and we'll go into that in just a minute. You can look through these a little bit more at your leisure and scroll down and see some of the different things it promises. But one thing I did want to call attention to right now is that already with Google Apps for Business at just $50 per user per year, you're guaranteed almost 100% uptime. And I have yet to ever experience a denial of service or any kind of problem accessing any of my Google applications. I can't always say that for my other domains that I work with on a regular basis. So that's a really important key thing to know right there. Google is pretty much the gold standard in the industry for uptime. There's very, very few times you'll be denied service. Now, some of you may have already heard there's such a thing called Google for nonprofits. And since we are most definitely a nonprofit, you might wonder why we're not using that. There's two reasons. One is that in order to get any kind of discount, so you can just use your nonprofit status to get a discount on the regular Google Apps for Business, but you have to have 3,000 or more users. We do not. We have 7. So we don't come close to getting the discount. And they also have a free version of Google Apps specifically for nonprofits, but it doesn't include some of the key features that we use that I'll be telling you about in a minute. So in the end, Google for nonprofits was not so helpful for us. That wasn't a direction to go in. But I included the link because for your organization, it might actually be a great direction to go in. Might be a great way. So let me pause for just a minute. I'd like to go next into a couple of the tools that we use regularly. Some of these are going to already be familiar to those of you who use Google products for personal reasons. But let me just pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions so far. And if you have a question, you can either type it into the question box or you can just use the raise hand button and I can call on you. You can ask your question live. Are there any questions? Just as a note, all of your microphones are muted currently. That's just in order to keep the background noise down. But we can open up any microphones. You just use the raise hand button, and I'm more than happy to call on you at any time during the webinar. I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll keep on plugging ahead. I want to make sure we have lots of time for Q&A today. All right, so one of the main things that we use, one of the main tools is Gmail. This is very similar in terms of how it functions in an organization, the same as it functions for an individual. On an individual basis, the Google Apps for Business versus the personal version. One thing that I particularly like about it is that Google has got Google Chat now and also a video chat version. So if you're an office that's separated, if you work remotely with a lot of your colleagues but everybody has a webcam and you'd like to have a little bit more of a feeling of a virtual community, a little bit more contact, you can actually make video calls now directly within Gmail to get in touch with your colleagues, which is a nice feature. It makes it immediate to get in touch with people, have a quick face-to-face meeting, and then move on with your day. This doesn't function really in any way different from any other of the Gmail email products. It is, of course, dramatically different from Outlook and some of the other desktop-based software. This, of course, is computing in the cloud. So all of your email is available anytime you have an internet connection, which is great. There used to be something called Google Gears, by which you could use that to download all of your email and work offline. Google actually phased that out about 1.5 years ago, and they're now making a very similar system available through Google Chrome. Chrome is the Google browser, so if you use Google Chrome, you can download some free apps from the Chrome store that allow you to do the same thing with your Gmail, with your Google Calendar, with a number of the other services where basically you can work completely offline, and then the next time you connect, it makes all the changes. It sends all of your emails, receives new emails, takes care of all the work that you completed while you were offline automatically. So it's a great thing to know about it. It sort of removes the incentive to be using a desktop-based or a laptop-based system. So we use Gmail. We also use Google Calendar, and you're going to see some of my own personal stuff here. And it's one of the things I wanted to point out about this. I use Google Calendar personally on my own personal account. I also obviously use Google Calendar for my work account. And one of the nice things about this is it makes it very easy to share calendars with each other, but then also keep some information private for yourself. Again, all web-based, completely available anywhere that you might be. So if I just take out some of my personal calendars here, I'll take out U.S. holidays, you can see that now I'm actually down to my calendars that I share with the office. In addition to that, I can also view Erin's calendar and Lissa's calendars, which then shows us what they're working on during the day, when they're busy, when they're free. This is really, really useful, but it's got even more features, which I'll go into in just a minute. So again, very similar to Outlook, Microsoft Outlook, and some of the other features that are available. The interface is not terribly different either. That was done intentionally so that the switch over between those two systems is quite easy. Let me go ahead and take their events off and put mine back on. So Google Calendar is another thing that we use heavily. Now we come to Google Groups. And this is Google Groups for Business. And this is the reason, this one particular app is the reason that as an organization we decided to go with the Google Apps for Business account instead of Google Apps for nonprofits or Google Apps for individuals. Google Groups for Business allows you to do a couple of really important things. The first thing it allows you to do is to automatically add people to the listservs that you develop. So we'll just go in and look at the Switzer Fellows listserv really quickly. It actually allows me to choose to add members. Oops, excuse me, I hit the wrong button. So I can invite members, and you can see here I can add members directly. This is a really important feature that none of the other Google Groups versions allow you to do. All the other Google Groups versions allow you to invite people, but then they have to choose to add your group to their list. We decided this was important for us because we wanted to establish all of the affinity groups, which we did over the last month and a half or so, and we wanted to be able to add fellows directly into those groups instead of hoping that they would join. We felt that the value we were giving for the affinity groups was high enough to justify adding people directly to the groups. Obviously, this is a feature you have to use extremely carefully. Google monitors this, and if you add enough people to your groups and they reject that, they call you a spammer, Google will deactivate this feature on your account. So Google does maintain ultimate control. They're very flexible about it, but they are very tough on spammers, which actually has its benefits. I have yet to get much spam in my personal Gmail account, and I think I've never received a spam message in my Switzer Gmail account. So it's definitely got its benefits going with Google and their incredibly strict policies on spam. So I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about some of the features that we don't use in Google Apps. You can see that there's a dashboard here. You can see where some of the major apps that we're using right here. We are not using all of the tools that are available. There are literally hundreds of apps available. You can see here where it says go to Google Apps Marketplace. If I click on that, it takes me, whoops, I'm signed into both accounts right now. It takes me to this list of, really pretty much everything you could imagine. If you're using Shopify or if you're using Constant Contact, if you're using pretty much any major cloud computing software out there, there's going to be an app that you can integrate that software with your Google Apps account. That, of course, makes it incredibly easy because it means all of the various apps that users and employees of an organization use, you can set it up within the organizational dashboard to actually be available to those users all the time. That's essentially what you're looking at here is my dashboard, and because I have administrator privileges on this website, I can add those apps directly for all users on the domain or for just individual users. It takes all of the problems out of the hands of your users. So one of the things I really like about Google Apps for organizations that use it completely, so 100% of their IT environment, it means that that essentially you can control what people are able to use, but more importantly, you can give them the tools they need without constantly forcing updates. So I think we've all been in the office when the IT guy comes along and says, okay, it's time to upgrade your computer, and you can't use it for several hours as he reinstalls Windows and reinstalls all kinds of software, and everything has to be upgraded, and then things don't work quite the way they did before they did it. It can be very frustrating and very time-consuming and a big chunk out of your day. With Google Apps, you never face that, because with Google Apps, they're doing all the upgrades in the background. So every time you sign into Gmail or Google Calendar or any of the apps, it is the newest, most current version of the software available because it's all housed on Google servers. So it really is, it is a big plus to cloud computing to not ever have to upgrade software that you're using. All right, let me go into a couple of the things that we're not using, specifically that we're not using. You are able to use Google Calendar for Business to actually schedule resources. Now, we don't have need for that in our office, at least not at this point, but you can use it to schedule conference rooms, if you have equipment, equipment packages that go out with people for any reason, if you have laptops or even company cars, Anything that's a resource that needs to be scheduled and controlled, you can do that through a very special feature of Google Calendar, and that way everybody who's on the system can see exactly when that resource is available or when it's taken. When it's taken, you can see who's got it, their name and phone number, and give them a call and see if they actually need it. So that's a really helpful tool that Google Calendar offers. Another tool that we do not use right now is the Google Sites. You can actually use Google Sites to create mini websites. You can see that they've got blank templates and galleries. We'll go ahead and just use the blank template. And I'll just name the site Webinar Test. It automatically gives me a website name, and we're just going to be kind of blow through this very quickly here. And then we're going to go ahead and create the site. It gives me the ability to create subpages on this. This is probably not the kind of theming or the kind of website creation tool that you would want to use for your homepage for your organization, but it's a fantastic tool to use for intranet sites if you have project teams that need to collaborate with each other, that need to share calendars or task lists or even just a countdown clock for what they're working on. All of that can be created in Google Sites with no previous programming experience in about 15 minutes. So it's an incredibly fast website creation tool and really serves some great purposes. When I worked for the University of Florida, we used the University of Florida Google Apps creation, website creation tool, which was the same as this basic one that you get with Google Apps. We used that to create websites that ran the Sustainability Council for the university. We did it for every major grant. People were encouraged to use Google Sites to create the grant page so that people outside the university could get access to it. You can share access specifically with individuals who are inside or outside of your organization. So again, a great tool for collaboration. We're not, again, currently using this particular feature because we don't have need of it, but it is a very handy thing that comes with Google Apps. Another feature that we're not using currently is this Google Cloud Connect for Microsoft Office. This is a phenomenal tool. It really takes Google Apps and just blows it out of the park in terms of its functionality with some other more computer-based applications. Essentially what it does is it allows you to upload Microsoft Office documents, whether they're Word, PowerPoint, or Excel. Then you can share them with your coworkers and keep the most up-to-date versions on the Google servers. So essentially it replaces a working network drive. If you've got a lot of documents that you use in Microsoft Office that you need to be able to access and keep in the Microsoft Office format, this makes it really easy to do that, and any collaborator can come in and work with you on those documents. You can also collaborate in real time, so you can work on a presentation or another document in real time. The reason that we're not currently using this fantastic tool that I love so much is it's not available for Mac, and I am unfortunately on a Mac, and I work from Florida, so it makes it really hard then if some people in the office were using this and others weren't. So if you're a Mac shop, this particular tool won't work for you, at least not yet. But if you're a PC-only organization, this is a fantastic piece of Google Apps for Business to know about. All right, let me go ahead and take a pause there. We're going to be jumping into how to get buy-in from organizations, but I've covered quite a bit already, and I just wanted to ask and see if there were any questions. If you've got questions, feel free to use the raise hand button, and I can call on you, and you can use your microphone, or you can type questions into the questions box, and I will answer them as well. Great, I see a hand. Brian, let me unmute your microphone. Okay, Brian, you are live.
Hi, Lauren. You may have covered it. I was having problems getting online. But so do you use an offline mail system then? Do you have like your messages also download into just the regular Mac mail program, or do you use nothing offline?
That's a great question. I don't use anything offline, believe it or not. Gmail actually does, all of these Google apps sync beautifully with smartphones. So with any smartphone you might have, the iPad, anything, you could use a Wi-Fi connection or anything. I live in Gainesville, Florida, which is pretty well blanketed by wireless or cell signal, so I actually don't. I'm basically can always go online, but I know that not everybody works in that world, which is why I mentioned. And you may have missed this part, but I was just mentioning that all of these Google Apps programs now have the ability, if you use Google Chrome on your computer or your
Right.
iPad or anything, you can actually then download all of your messages. It basically syncs it. It keeps your computer synced all the time, so that even if
Right.
you had connectivity and you were, say, driving down the interstate and then you suddenly lost it, you actually could keep working seamlessly. You don't have to stop, download everything, wait, you know what I mean? Like it's actually constantly doing it in the background, so that if you just lose connectivity briefly, you just keep working. You don't know the difference, and as soon as it gets connected again, it takes all those changes and makes them happen in the quote-unquote real world. So
Okay.
I actually don't have a backup, and I've worked remotely now, both for the University of Florida and for Switzer, for 6 years, and I have not used a desktop-based email system in 6 years. I've used Gmail only.
Right. Okay. Great.
And
Thanks.
that, yeah, these days I don't travel much because I have a young daughter, but I used to go, on trips for the State Department. I went to Vladivostok, Russia. I went to Bosnia. I mean, I went some places where connectivity was an issue, and always found a way to use that, so it worked really well.
Good. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and mute your microphone again. If you have another question, by all
Okay.
means, raise your hand. So Enid's got a question. She's saying, are there limits on the number of people you can invite to or add to a group? Any limit on the number of groups you can have? That's a great question. There are limits, but they're huge. I don't have access to them right this minute, but I can definitely find that for you and email it to you. The number of people you can add to a group is in the tens of thousands. I want to say it's 25,000 people. And limits on the number of groups you can have, that is actually unlimited. You can have as many groups as you'd like to have. There's only a limit on how many people can join a group. There are also limits on how big a file attachment can be that goes out to a Google group for business, but it's also, I think, 25 megabytes. So it's a big file. The limit is actually larger than most people's inboxes are able to handle. So in other words, you wouldn't want to ever send something that large. But it actually works quite well if you're trying to send things to people either through Gmail or through Google Groups with large files. And Edith also had a backup question. What can you say about the encryption of files? We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. We're going to talk about that next, in fact, when we talk about how you get buy-in at the top. And a great question is about Google Drive. Also Enid's question related to Google Drive. Google Drive is a very new feature that essentially does replace a network drive for you. So it's a drive that you can put any kind of file on, just like you would use a network drive, except Google is your network. They are your provider, essentially, in that case. They're rolling it out to Google Apps for business users. We just received our notice yesterday, in fact, that our account will be upgraded in the next week or two. It's free. It's included with everything else, and it actually will replace the Google Docs feature that they have right now. Google Docs was limited mostly to documents you created within Google Apps themselves. But of course, people use all kinds of files. I mean, in my day, I use PDFs. I use Microsoft Office formatted documents, Google Documents, video. So Google Drive is Google's recognition that people use a huge variety of file formats, and they're giving you an enormous amount of space to hold them. And let's see, any raised hands? And it's also asking about any charges for transit, upload, download. There are none. Everything's included in that price. I mean, I'll be honest with you, like, you're going to have a hard time finding a reason not to get Google Apps if you're looking at price. We were using just a listserv alone, just to host the Switzer Fellows listserv for the Switzer Foundation. We looked at how much that was costing us per year. We looked at Google Apps for Business for 7 users, which is, those of us in the office, plus an administrator account, plus our web designer has an account on our system. Just for seven of us, the cost obviously was $350 a year because it's $50 per user. That actually, by making that switch, we saved money. We beat our price just alone on moving our listserv, our one listserv, from our company that we were using over to Google Apps. That right there paid for Google Apps completely for every year. And in addition to that, obviously, we got a huge number of other applications and functionality out of it. We got all of our affinity groups. All of those listservs would have cost us additional money with our previous provider. So if you're replacing IT or replacing parts of IT, or you're replacing other services, there's a good chance you can cover the cost of Google Apps in a millisecond by just making the switch over. And then Hillary has a great question. Hillary's asking if we set up Google Apps for ourselves or if we used an outside provider. The answer in our case is we used me. And it's fairly easy to set up, but there are some things to know, and there are what are called Google Apps resellers out there who will sell you Google Apps and do all of the setup for you for free. They are actually paid on commission by Google, so you pay the same amount of money to get things set up as you would if you just ordered Google Apps straight up. So that's a great thing to know about. They're called Google Apps resellers, and you can just go to any of those resellers. They know exactly how to do things. I set it up for us because I was familiar enough with the background and knew what we wanted, so rather than go back and forth with a reseller, we didn't do that. But if IT is not your thing, Google Apps resellers are definitely the way to go. Because setup is a concern, for sure. I mean, you do not want to make this transition and suddenly find yourself mired in confusion. I will say, in general, again, because once you get it set up, it just updates automatically. The amount of time you probably are already spending updating some of your computers to do word processing with Microsoft or handle the very newest version of Outlook or whatever, like that time basically evaporates if you make a switch to Google Apps. Now, we're going to talk in fact, right now, we're going to talk about some of the challenges, so some of the things to keep an eye on when you make this kind of transition. So it looks like that's the direction our questions are going in, so I'm going to go ahead and take it in that direction. And Brian has a question. You're in the UK. Any idea if all of this works over there? That's a really good question. I think I would have to say in the UK, yes. If you were calling from China, that would be a different story. But I will find out for you. I actually don't know that off the top of my head, so I will find out the answer to that for you and get back to you on email. All right, so I think we're all set for questions for right now. Let me go ahead and jump to the next part, and we'll have more time for more questions in a few minutes. So let's talk about how you get buy-in. This is a really important area because people have concerns, and they are very well-grounded, and we want to make sure that everybody in your organization feels comfortable before you even start the process of moving this over. So Google is very smart. This is their Google Apps for Business benefits page, and you can see that the very first thing that they cover is security. So the thing that matters most to people is security. Do I have control over my data? Will anybody else touch it? Is it safe going back and forth across the internet? 10 years ago, I probably would have said, you know, I have some reservations. At this point, Google is pretty much the gold standard in the industry for this as well. They're the gold standard for keeping data safe because their entire reputation depends on it. Most small organizations use local or remote server banks, so domain hosts and server banks. People are on laptops and desktops where they're using desktop and computer-based software, which may or may not be upgraded to the latest version. As we all know, there are a billion software upgrades that come out every year for Microsoft products and security patches and everything else. So obviously we always have to be careful of that. I would say in general, and this is really just generally speaking, you'd have to compare your IT needs and abilities with what Google's offering. But in general, Google is offering a much safer IT package than most small organizations can afford on their own, piecing it together with outside providers. It's not the case for everyone, but in general, because Google takes data so seriously, they are very unlikely to be hacked. The number of times they've been hacked in the last 10 years, I can count on one hand. Hacks that would, affect an end user. Basically, it's just an incredibly safe system. So let me scroll down a little bit here. There are some other aspects of this that are important. The staying connected from anywhere, obviously, is incredibly important for the top-down users, the folks that are at the top of your organization. You want to make sure that work is saved, and this is actually a great argument for using the cloud, believe it or not. Essentially, I mean, how many times have we all been working on a document and had the power go out, right? And you lose everything because you weren't saving it every 10 seconds, basically. Or we've created documents, had them on our desktop, and then a natural disaster strikes, or you leave your laptop in an airport, or name your disaster, right? We've all lost documents that we'd worked incredibly hard on and for whatever reason hadn't backed up appropriately. With Google, whenever you're online, it's constantly backing up your work. you also have access to all of the previous revisions. So if you're working along in a document, you suddenly, on a presentation, you suddenly realize you forgot to make a copy and work on the copy, and you're working on your original, you can actually go back to the original, resave that, and then go back to doing what you're doing and save it in a new file. It's no problem at all. All of those previous revisions are saved within the Google system. Now, obviously, that's only when you're working online, but the way Google is working around that right now is through Google Chrome, like, with the ability to work offline on things and then have changes update when you're online. The benefit, of course, for not only staying connected everywhere is that you can collaborate with other people. So that's where it talks here about working together better. For organizations where everyone's in the same office, all sharing one server, that's probably or could be an example of where you're better off just sticking with the system that you currently have. But if you travel for any amount of time every year, or if your employees are spread around the country, around the globe, being able to work in the cloud saves an enormous amount of time of uploading files, sending files, downloading files, wondering if somebody else is making changes to the file while you're working on it. Essentially, you're always collaborating in real time on these documents, and so you have the ability to not worry about, did somebody save it, did somebody back it up, is this the latest version? Instead of emailing documents around, you email links, or even just collaborate. You just share the document with the people who need it, and anyone can access it at any time from one place. I'm going to skip over these last couple of things because these are the more technical sides of it, but something that's certainly relevant for this particular group is that Apple has made sure that all of their data centers are carbon neutral. Now, obviously, there's carbon neutral and there's carbon neutral. They are not carbon neutral based on the carbon that went into the production of all of the equipment in their data centers. However, they are using reusable energy, renewables, and renewable energy for all of the data centers, and have gone carbon neutral in terms of the operations of their facilities, which is pretty impressive. So let me go ahead and scroll back up here. I did just want to show, I'm not going to go into this article because it's an article, you can go back and read it, but in terms of the security question, that is the #1 question that comes up for people when they are considering the switch to Google Apps. And the Read Write Web website, which is a very good industry website, actually covered this topic about a year ago, a little less than a year ago in 2011, and talked about, sort of lay it out for you, how it is that Google protects your data in the cloud. And so it's a great article if the main concern in your organization is data security, which it is for many people, and it is the #1 concern for a reason. This article really lays out nicely for you exactly what Google does to protect you. And I would challenge you to look at your own data servers, either in your building or offsite, and take all of these things that Google does and match them up against your current provider. You might actually find that there are some risks with your current system that Google has managed to eliminate. So that link is also included in the delicious links. Now, another main question that comes up when people are looking at making this change is, what about data migration, right? There's the question of security. The second biggest concern is, how do I make the transition smooth? And that involves both data migration as well as learning curve for employees using these systems. So the question for data migration, Google has actually handled very, very slickly. They have fantastic apps that essentially migrate all of your Microsoft Exchange or Microsoft Outlook information over immediately. So if you've been using desktop-based email for a long time, you've got potentially thousands, potentially tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of emails, calendar appointments, all kinds of previous data, contacts, everything that's stored in your Microsoft-based products. Obviously, you don't want to spend a lot of money to move that to a new system. These Google Apps migration tools have been tested for about 3.5 years now. They work perfectly, and they work quickly. So that's one way to go. Another way to go is actually you can use their apps, add-on tools within within Google Apps that actually allow you to access your Google information through your Microsoft products. So we have staff members who actually prefer to use Microsoft Outlook, but they have the ability to access their Google calendars from there as well. So it is possible to actually not go whole hog, to do sort of a partial migration and let employees continue to use the tools they're comfortable with, but still gain some of the cloud benefits that Google Apps offers. If that's a sort of mixed migration is something you're looking for, that's definitely something to talk to a Google Apps reseller about, because they can give you some tips and tools for how to do that effectively. All right. So let me just jump to the employee side of this question. This is sort of from the bottom-up perspective. From the bottom up, if you're looking to make this migration over to Google Apps for Business, essentially what people need is the confidence to move from the desktop-based systems they're already familiar with and move over to Google Apps-based systems. Now, for the most part, I have found at least that that transition is fairly smooth when it comes to Gmail and Google Calendar. You essentially make the transition over, and the interfaces are quite similar as you go across. For some of the other tools like Vault or Google Groups, those are fairly new interfaces. Google Help is extremely well written, very simple. You'll find that in general, Google Apps have a much simpler, cleaner interface, especially if you're used to working with Microsoft products. There are fewer features offered, but the ones that are offered are the ones that people actually use. And so in general, you'll find that the transition is fairly smooth because people can always find the tools that they like to use, and they're not cluttered up with a bunch of other features. Now, if you are an online page designer, if you're a print designer, for example, and you use very specialized software like InDesign, those apps are not available, or very high-level photo editing software is not available yet on Google Apps. But they do have basic versions. There are basic print layout tools available, and there's also basic photo editing available through Picasa. So, if you're working on a more basic level with most tools and the software that you use, users can actually find the transition to be even easier than they would expect, because it's easier to find the features that they need. So that's, let me just look at my list here, see if I missed anything. I don't think I did. So that's everything that I wanted to show you up front. But I would like to go ahead and take additional questions if you have them, things that you saw that you'd like me to go back to, or if you have questions about some of the things that we covered in the webinar. I would be very happy to take those questions at this point. I hope that you all can't hear my daughter is making a bit of a fit in the next room. I don't know if everybody can hear that or not. I may need to go into her for just a moment. But first we have a question from Enid. She says, Steve Gibson of the Gibson Research and Security Now recommends a trust no one mentality. For cloud storage services, he recommends that all files should be encrypted before being uploaded, and that only the user should have the encryption key. Obviously, that doesn't make sense for docs created in Google Docs by a team, but what about Microsoft Office files being uploaded? That's a really good question, and I'm not enough of a security expert. I can tell you I've worked in the cloud computing space for a long time. I have, and I've worked with a variety of organizations, including the University of Florida, which is the third largest university in the country. It has very clear data protection rules, and they actually allow the use of Google Apps for Business by all units on campus. They've determined that the files uploaded there without previous encryption. Now, Google obviously does its own encrypting and uploading. You upload and download everything through a secure server once you're logged in, and you have to be logged in order to upload or download anything. So Google has set it up in such a way that your data is actually encrypted. Oh, I'm getting a message that Don can't hear. Is anyone else here having problems hearing me? Anybody else? If anybody else is having trouble hearing me, would you go ahead and use the raise hand button? I'm gonna hope everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, go ahead and type a message into the chat box. Don, can you hear me now? Oh, you can hear me, but not my daughter. Oh, you can't hear my daughter. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'm glad to hear that because she's making a ruckus. She's playing. So sorry. Let me go back to Enid's question. So anyhow, the short answer to your question is that you wouldn't have to worry about that with Google Docs. The longer answer to that question is it is Google, so people obviously have concerns about Google itself. For me personally, I don't do anything that's important enough for Google to want to spy on me. Quite frankly, I mean, they have way bigger things on their minds. And the minute that anyone found out Google was interfering with private data in Google Apps for Business, it would be essentially the end of their business. It would be the end of Google Apps for Business. So that's definitely a personal decision. I can tell you that just from the technical side, you wouldn't have to worry about it. from the more philosophical side, that's something to think about for sure. So, and Edith's following up saying, many people say that with Google, you are the product since they scan your content, at least in Gmail, and use that to tailor advertising. It seems creepy. How do you address this fear or concern? It is done passively. That scanning is done by servers and done passively, but I would just second what I said before is you definitely have to think for your own organization if you feel comfortable with that. I think that the advantages to using cloud-based computing in terms of productivity and reach and just ease of working outweigh, for me and for Switzer, outweigh any concerns we have about invasion of privacy from Google. But it's something to think about. And there's actually a really good, if you Google Google Apps privacy policy, they have the entire privacy policy is online, and you can look through it all and see exactly how they handle individual pieces of data, what's scanned passively, what where you might run into issues where you don't like what they're doing. So I would definitely recommend doing that. Margaret is asking, will Google Apps migrate email from Thunderbird and other non-Microsoft email clients? And the answer is yes. Each of those email clients has the ability to export an archive file. So you go in and you export your entire contents of your software, whether it's cloud-based or desktop-based. You export it into an archive file, and then Google has the ability, Gmail has the ability to read those archive files directly. The apps transition tool that I mentioned for Microsoft Outlook does exactly that. They just, because there's so many people using Outlook, they made a little quick tool that does it for you, so you don't have to export one file and import it a second time. It actually just does it automatically. But it's this exact same process that it's following by doing that. So let me scroll down a little bit. Let's see. Brian is asking, but you don't get ads with a business account, right? That is correct. One of the nice things about going with Google Apps for Business is that you do not get Google, you can opt out of the apps. That's the way I should say it. It's not automatic, but you have the ability to opt out, which is great. That means you and your employees do not have to look at Gmail ads anymore. That alone might be worth the $50 a year to get that done. Enid's asking, will Google de-encrypt and release client info upon a legit request from law enforcement, as Dropbox says they will? Google is subject to any rules that that are currently enforced. In terms of the specifics of that, I don't know, but I can guarantee it's in their privacy policy. It would have to be, because that's a law enforcement question. So they would definitely have to address that in their privacy policy. Brenda, hi Brenda. She's saying she joined a little late. Did you say you use it in your work with Switzer? Which tools do we use? And I'll send you an email later. Just to run over for people, because we had actually a number of people who arrived late. The main tools that we use at Switzer, we do use Google Apps for Business. We have the paid account. We pay $50 per year per user. We have 7 users, so it's about $350 a year for us. The main tools that we use are Gmail, because it's cloud-based email. We use the calendars, and we use Google Groups for Business. We used Google Groups and went with the business account because it offers that, because we have all of your affinity groups as listservs on there. And if Google Groups for Business, if listserv and affinity groups is an important part of your organization's work, the Google Groups for Business app alone is worth the $50 per year per user. So let's see, it looks like, wow, did I really just make it through all of the questions? Can that be? Please feel free to send another batch. I don't see any hands. Whoops, maybe there's one hand raised. We looked at, oh, Hillary. Hang on one second, let me go ahead and unmute you. Hi, Hillary, what's your question?
Oh, I think I actually raised my hand from before, but
oh,
but it's okay.
I
had asked a question about how to get set up. Do you have any reseller recommendations? I guess you did all of the setup for the Switzer account, so you know how to do this yourself.
We do. You know, so they're everywhere. First of all, the reseller that we used or that we could have used is actually our network provider. So the IP provider that we use in Maine, they have a reseller on staff. Pretty much any, I would hazard to guess at this point, any network provider is going to have a Google reseller on staff. Now they may vary in terms of their knowledge of how to set different kinds of things up. And so if there's something really specific that you need someone to do, you might want to ask them about that up front. Ask them up front if they know how to do that. But they all have the ability to get in touch with a special Google Apps reseller help desk. And so, in general, like we had a few questions for our reseller before we ended up just setting it up ourselves. But they have the ability to email into these specific areas and say, can you help me with this? So that's no problem.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm sorry to do this. Let me just take 2 minutes and go find out what's up with my daughter. I will be right back. I really apologize about this, but it'll give you all a chance to think of some more questions. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. For those of you who have children, you'll understand how hard our lives are right now. My daughter is 20 months old and has stopped napping completely. So I apologize. I've never actually had to interrupt a webinar. All right, let's go back to questions from Enid. Can staff members set controls over what the members of a group can do with certain files, such as not allowing certain files in a folder be deleted if it's intended to be a shared resource? Yes. In fact, with Google Apps, you have incredible control over everything. So let me actually go into my Docs account. That was not something that I showed previously. So like I mentioned before, we will be upgraded to Google Vault sometime in the next couple of weeks. So this interface will actually look a little different for us very soon. But this is our current Google Docs storage, which is where we create a lot of documents that we use to share things. Let me find one that I can share on a public webinar. Let's see, this is a good one. So this is a good example, the Switzer Tamarack collaboration. Tamarack is the company that works on our website for us. This particular document is owned by Lissa. I am shared on it, so she's given me editing privileges. So I actually have the ability to use this file and to edit it as well. If I scroll down, let me see. Well, let's just look at this file. This is the file that we're actually in the other browser right now. This is a presentation. This is this particular presentation. If I want to share it, I can click right over here. I can share it with specific people. I can add people. I can give them editing privileges or just viewing privileges. I have the ability to share with people outside of our domain, but you actually can control that. So the administrator on an apps account can allow people to share outside the domain or not. So that's a really useful thing. You can make it so that people cannot invite guests to your internal documents from outside the organization. You can also use this. Let me go back and cancel out of this. You can also use it to, whoops, done. You can also email as an attachment or even publish a document or embed it, say, on your website. So if you have an annual report, you can do it in Google Apps and then embed it directly. If changes are made within Google Apps, those changes immediately show up on your website as well, which is also very useful. You can embed tables and charts or presentations or a variety of things and then just sort of work with them as you go and have them show up, the changes show up automatically. So that's quite useful. In addition to those controls, you also have the ability to control through Google Apps which applications users can use. You also have the ability to turn on scanning. There's more advanced features with the Vault, with the Google Apps for Business with Vault, but you actually do have the ability to go through and search through people's emails and that kind of thing, which is legal. I mean, if an employee writes something through a work email account, that is considered the property of the company anyhow. By law. But you also have the ability to control user accounts, so access through user accounts. You can set up outside people, so outside people can have access to your website and then you can control their access. So for example, Daniel, our web designer, has an account on our system and has access to a lot of our materials, but not everything. Things that we want to keep private from outside eyes, we have the ability to shut those off to outsiders, and that's all controlled through a central dashboard. So usually those are features that the IT department in your company or externally outsourced company would have to control for you. So every time you want to set up a new user or every time you want to put something into a private folder, you usually have to contact a network administrator to do that. With Google Apps, you can actually do it yourself, and it's very easy. It's very straightforward in the applications. So Brian is asking, what were the biggest hiccups along the way in our transition? That's a good question. I think that for us, you know, we all, so Lissa and Dawn and Aaron are all in Maine, and I'm in Florida. And so for us, you know, to make a whole-scale transition over to Google Apps didn't make sense because they're, you know, they all work together in the office with a network drive that's backed up regularly, that's, you know, Microsoft Office ready, and they're all on PCs. So they have one environment in Maine, and then I'm in Florida on a Mac, you know, like a different environment. So I would say, I wouldn't really call it a hiccup so much as we decided to go with a more mixed system that works really well for us. So we didn't do a wholesale transition to Google Apps because it just wouldn't have made sense. It would have been too much of a learning curve for no real benefit because I'm the main person working remotely. I would say there is a learning curve for some of these technologies. So if you're moving over to Google Calendar, people do need a little bit of time to get used to it. But you know, Switzer's probably not the best example. I would say the best example is when I worked for the University of Florida. You know, they took on Google Apps as an officially recognized software or service provider for the university when I first started there. And so I was suddenly in, you know, like every committee on campus was making its move to Google Apps, and every research project on campus was making a transition to Google Apps. And that was confusing. I would say the hiccup there was just not enough support because everybody was moving at one time. But that's, you know, it's the university has like 30,000+ staff members. So it was a big transition that they were making at the same time. I would say for smaller organizations, especially if you have a number of people already using some form of a Google app, like if they're already using Gmail for private purposes or they have an account with Google Calendar, the transition is kind of imperceptible once you move the data over. It's kind of easy. The biggest challenge, I would say, is buy-in, you know, getting that up front, sort of talking about it, answering everyone's questions before you make the move, and getting the answers to your own questions before you make the move is, it will avoid pretty much any hiccup you might hit along the way. To summarize that, Google has the resources to make your transition easy if you're committed to making the transition. So I'd say hiccups start to occur where the change, and you know, isn't this true for everything in life, the change has not been agreed to by everyone in the organization up front. Once everyone agrees, gets on the same page, has their questions answered, the transition itself tends to be fairly smooth, if not completely smooth. So let me move on. We've got a few more minutes, and I've got a few more questions, so I think that'll work well. Enid's asking, can automatic email reminders be sent to members of a group who have not replied to an email or completed a form? So that's a good question. I don't believe that there is a system for automated reminders either through Gmail or through Google Groups that I'm aware of. What I use in Gmail, and I can just show you this very quickly because it's associated with my Switzer account. Oh, no, it's not. It's associated with my private account. Let me switch over to my private account quickly and just show you. It's a tool called Boomerang. It's free. It's a free plugin for Gmail. And they changed the interface on me. Let me, 1 second. Usually it shows up at the top. That's one thing with Gmail and just with Google products. Every day you might notice some tiny tweak. Like the interface never changes completely, but there will always be a tiny tweak. So this is Boomerang, and you can Google, you know, Boomerang and get this app. So essentially, when you click on Boomerang this message, it gives me the ability to tell it when I want to send the message and if I want to schedule follow-ups. Oh, this is too difficult, sorry. Usually they just changed this. So, but Boomerang is a way that you can do that. You can basically go in and tell it how often, if somebody replies, if I don't hear back, in 2 days, in 4 days. You can even delay sending the message using Boomerang. So you can write emails today that aren't going to go out for 3, 4, 5 days. That's the most automated sort of thing that I found, the most automated way I've done that. There may be a better way, but that's what I use. Let me get back out of here. Let me actually go back, since we're going to be ending in just a few minutes. Let me just go back and remind everyone, I've got a few more questions to answer, but just want to remind everyone that this delicious link will take you to this list of links. These are all the links that we covered today. Some of them obviously will look a little different to you. when you visit because you won't be logged in as me. So you won't be able to visit our dashboard or my calendar or my Gmail account. Obviously, it'll take you to your own, but it'll at least give you a sense of what we visited today. Let me just go flip through. I did put the link. This delicious link is over here in the chat window. That's the link you'll use. I will add that link as well as the webinar video for this and some additional tips and tricks that I found along the way. That will be posted to the blog in our next few days. It's switzernetwork.org/blog. Also make sure that you get in touch with us through Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about what I've covered today, I hope that you will feel free to get in touch. It's Lauren@switzernetwork.org. So let me go ahead and jump back to questions. Chris has two. Fantastic. The first is, how is Google Drive different from Dropbox? You know, Chris, that's a really good question. So because we've struggled with this a little bit. We use both Dropbox and Google Apps, which is kind of funny. We use both services for different purposes. Google Drive integrates with all of the other Google services. So in other words, if you're building a website using Google Sites, you can link to things on your Google Docs Drive or your Google Drive, which is what they're upgrading to, that you wouldn't be able to access through Dropbox, right? So it's integrated that way. If you want to use Google Groups for business and you want to make a file there available to everyone in a specific group, you can do that through Google Docs and then just change the permissions. You couldn't do that through Dropbox. In terms of how is it different for individual users, like do I want to use Dropbox or Google Drive, I would say if you don't have a need to have your documents integrated into other Google services, then just stick with Dropbox. That's fine. It works just fine that way. It's very similar. The difference being integration. That's the primary difference. And Chris is asking, does Google also host the Switzer website? Yes and no. It does. So we actually have an external firm, which is where our reseller was. That's the reseller that we're going to go with. We have an external firm that hosts the website itself. And Google is actually not in the business yet of hosting major websites that weren't built through the Google Sites tool. So if you build something through Google Sites, Google can host it for you. If you didn't build it through Google Sites, then they don't host. So if that helps, if that makes sense. So we have an external company that's based in Belfast, I believe, that hosts our Switzer website. But then all of the other applications are serviced by Google. So if that makes sense, like in your organization, your website's probably still going to be hosted by an internet service provider, or excuse me, by a network host, and your software. So what normally lives on your laptop or your desktop, your spreadsheet system, your calendar system, your email system, those would all be hosted essentially by Google. So all of your data would be hosted there. So hopefully that helps. And we have a few more questions. The questions are still coming in. This is exciting. Brenda, we own our own documents. They have access to them, but can they use them for more scanning than for advertising? For example, I understand that one security setting on Facebook allows advertisers to use a photo posted on Facebook to attract people with similar demographics. Is there any kind of risk like that for using cloud docs, pics, etc.? I won't speak to the other services. So Facebook is another cloud computing service. Anything that's internet-based with all of your data out there on somebody else's server is considered a cloud computing application. I can only speak for Google in saying that the Gmail scanning is passive. It's based on an algorithm. The server basically, as it filters through, it looks for keywords and then gives you ads based on that. So there is scanning going on. Scanning is different from reading legally, legally as well as a business model. So Google has promised that they're not reading your email, but that's definitely something to think about if you're worried. I mean, for sure, anything that's going across the server. It is worth keeping in mind that that the second you hit send on your computer, that file is going across somebody's hard drive, right? It's going across many networked computers, whether it's going through Google or not. Google has a lot to lose. Google has a lot more to lose, I should say. If they start spying on people, they have a lot more to lose than your local mom and pop network hosting provider, right? And when you send a message, it's going through that server. So it's not like Google's the only person who could spy on you. There are many out there, but Google's the biggest, and Google does seem a bit like Big Brother to some folks. So I think it's worth reading their privacy policies and making an informed decision about that. In terms of comparing them to Facebook, it's completely different. So no worries there. Facebook's policies, if you compare Facebook's privacy policies with Google's, you start to see the difference very quickly. Facebook basically considers your data theirs when you post it on Facebook. Google considers your data yours. And so that's a really key difference to understand between the two companies. Enid is saying we use Dropbox to share forms, applications, PDF resources. If we adopt Google Apps, could this take the place of Dropbox? And the answer is yes. Actually, for most of what you're talking about, Google Forms, applications, PDF resources, Google Docs already has the ability to upload those. Google Docs started as a service that you could only use to create Google spreadsheets, Google Word documents, Google Forms. But now, actually for at least a year, probably closer to 2 years, you've been able to upload forms, applications, PDF resources all within Google Docs. So actually even a free version of Google Apps could replace that. And I did just want to go back to thinking about the beginning of the presentation. For many of you, if not even for most of you, the free version of Google Apps would actually work just fine. The reason that we upgraded to the paid version was to get Google Apps for Business. And that was to do the affinity groups that we work with all of you. So it's definitely worth taking a look at those features because, you know, Dropbox is free, and you might think, well, why would I go from free Dropbox to paid Google Apps? There's a very good chance that Google Apps, the free version, would work for your organization. So it's worth taking a look at those lists closely. So let me just see if there's any other. I think that's it. And we are at 2:03, so we're 3 minutes over. It's a good time to call it a day. I just want to thank everyone for coming so much. Thank you for all the fantastic questions. If you have, if I missed your questions somehow along the way, which is possible, there's a lot of them here and they're really good ones. If I missed your question or you think of something after the webinar is over that you really want me to answer, please do email me, lauren@switzernetwork.org. And I hope you enjoyed yourselves today. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you at a future webinar. Bye-bye.